Well, I was in the middle of recording and giving my thoughts on a visual novel I read recently, or today and yesterday, but it crashed. My computer crashed as I was saying something about losing my train of thought. So I'm just gonna start over again and play White Knuckle instead, because it's been a while. Um, Actually, play the Chimney. I kind of like the Chimney. But yeah, I'm I was going over this visual novel that I read recently that I really like, and kind of feeling kind of like picking apart elements that I think make it very compelling, and which there are a lot of. So I guess to go over it again very quickly, you start off in a basement, and some characters kind of lead you out of it, and then you find yourself you then find yourself in a library, like a local public library, and there's like two characters that have a sort of like dialogue, or they kind of talk with each other. You can sense they have a little bit of some sort of dynamic going on, but you're not entirely sure what is happening. Um, and so then you quickly move into the premise of another story, and it's sort of contextualized, at least for me, as being a story within like the library setting. So um, the second story, I forgot what it's called. It's like acrylic something, acrylic sky maybe, but I don't think it's acrylic sky. Um, Acrylic whatever it was is really neat. I would characterize it as like a young adult fiction novel featuring elements of dystopia, sci-fi, uh, wrapped in the tone of like a sort of realistic mundanity, or kind of like comfiness, I guess, sort of. And it's really engaging, and I think what makes the whole thing very more interesting to me is sort of recognizing that as I'm reading this, it's still kind of within the setting of the public library, even though it's very much um, tonally, it's like quite a shift, I guess. But kind of remembering that the character is maybe reading the story within the library setting is interesting to me, because I feel like I'm simultaneously kind of immersed in this new setting and story, this new like semi dystopic sci-fi story, while also kind of viewing it, or kind of like dissecting it a little bit as if I'm like a scientist or something, and picking apart elements that I think make young adult fiction novels sort of compelling, I guess. And so like there are these like two kind of parallel threads that are happening as I'm reading, in my opinion. Not actually kind of similar, a little bit similar to, actually kind of similar to 1000 1000 Nights, or 1000 Arabian Nights, some might say. Um, and that story features like this character that continuously tells like recursive or nested stories to this like monarch figure, in hopes of like putting off their execution, I think. And yeah, it does kind of feel like that, because like starting off the premise with something as dire as that uh, makes the whole experience kind of even more memorable in a way, because in the back of the reader's mind they're always like they can always take a step back and remember that oh yeah, this was what this all was for. There's like hundreds of stories within this story. There are like hundreds of stories within this story, but then there's like, I guess some might say, the encapsulating story being the one that kind of reminds the viewers that no matter how like fantastical or absurd the situation or scenario may be, or premise may be, it kind of started off with this one very pretty I think socially relevant slash realistic maybe premise of like trying to like put off an execution, sort of, but there's more to it than that, obviously. But anyway, so yeah, that was really neat. And then by the end of that part of Acrylic Sky, there was something very interesting. There was a line that was really interesting that one of the characters mentioned later on from another story, and that being that the Acrylic Sky thing that I read, or the readers are reading, was only one half of the story. And I think it's implied that the second half of the story is sort of like fan fiction, I guess, or at least in this premise, because I would say the third part of this visual novel, being Cache, is sort of this kind of like entry that mimics an AO3 fic entry, where you're reading through somebody's fanfic of acrylic sky. It's not called Acrylic Sky. I just forgot what it was called. And yeah, one of the characters later on in the fourth part of the story is like, again, I think it's really interesting that they mention that Acrylic Sky that we read was only the first half, whereas the second half is, I think, what they were intending to, or what they were, again, implying, I think, is that the second half was this character's fan fiction of Acrylic Sky and the characters. And I think there is something pretty true about that, more or less. That being that, at least nowadays, the fanfic community feels like it's very much symbiotic, I guess, to put it lightly, maybe even parasitic to an extent, with a lot of like media or stories that reach a certain kind of threshold of popularity. So yeah, there's like a lot of fandoms now for, various shows or online web series where people are literally just pumping out tons and tons of fanfic of their favorite characters and scenarios and things like that, and it kind of like further fleshes out the world, or like suggests possibilities. And yeah, I think it's become less clear whether or not, I think it might be a little bit of a death of the author kind of moment, even though I've never been entirely familiar with that concept to begin with, I think. Maybe it is just a byproduct of growing up online and being sort of inculcated in all of this. And yeah, what was I saying? Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. So it's really interesting in that way, because here we have the authors of this story, Cache, sort of, I think what they're doing is writing out their own fan fiction for a story within their story. And I for a lot of reasons, I think that is a very neat idea. One being just a sort of like recursive, nested kind of creative way of telling stories and stuff. The other being that I think there's actually some pragmatic aspects about it as well. What I found interesting specifically about this was like they even included like the hits and kudos and like, I guess, metadata or like metrics data of of the fanfic page itself. So it was probably something like, oh, it got like 10 kudos and like 800 hits or something, or views, I don't know. And um, I feel like that's a really neat way of approaching things. It's almost like preemptively ascribing the popularity of certain like po- pre prescriptively deciding, I guess, the popularity of a fanfic of a specific fictional premise, and it it's really it's really cool. I guess that's all I have to say. It's really neat, and I like that idea as well because I think I do that sometimes. Like I've done some drawings where I included like YouTube or online video thumbnails within my drawing, as a I'm not entirely sure how I'd explain it, but I guess it'd almost be like guessing as well. It'd be like guessing, a little bit of a guessing thing too, and kind of like a self-rating thing as well. Like, oh, this fanfic is maybe worth about this much viewers or this much likes or whatever. And it's not always the case that more viewers or more likes equals better fanfic, obviously. I think there's this very specific threshold that some authors or writers or artists are kind of keen towards, where like there's like a specific balance of viewership and likes, for example, on a platform that has those metrics, that kind of allows the work to, or allows the writing or art or drawing to remain in a kind of sweet spot. I would describe it as not being like overly pandering to some very specific fandom, or isn't like doesn't include like very pandering, I guess, type tropes, sort of. And yeah, like naturally you're probably not going to get as many views, I guess, or likes or reposts or whatever, shares, but in turn, I think what's more important is that you get to connect with others online that kind of maybe feel more similarly or more in alignment with certain trends or aesthetics or modes of expression and things like that. So yeah, that's really cool. And then I would say the fourth part of this visual novel, Cachet, is, what was it called? It was called Twin Story or something like that. Twin Story. And I think this is the part where the author really kind of like makes their intention or philosophical outlook, I guess, general philosophical outlook of writing more noticeable and apparent, in that I think it is set in like a university / college setting. So in a way, it's a very sort of linear progression from the first story that, at least to me, takes on the tone of like a young adult fiction novel that you'd maybe see in like a high school or middle school setting. And yeah, this is where it continues to be pretty interesting, because again, I went over it earlier, but there are two characters in this, and one of them, you find out, is the one that wrote the fan fiction on AO3 about acrylic sky, or acrylic whatever it was called. And then it's really interesting the way these two characters interact, because one character kind of like accidentally, quote unquote, found the other character's like fanfic page, and somewhat naturally, as some may expect, um, the character that wrote the fanfic kind of was like freaking out a little bit. Not like absolutely freaking out, but they understandably they were like, oh no, somebody probably they were like, oh no, somebody in real life is looking at my potentially interpreted as smutty fiction fanfic. So what am I gonna do? Hold on. There we roll. Maybe I'll just get this. Actually, I think I'm gonna get this one. Just because I think it's pretty good. I feel like stamina on this map is pretty important. Wow, it's been a while since I played this game, but I always have such a good time with this. And I always feel like whenever I play this game, my monologue feels so flowy, or at least comparatively more flowy than when I play other stuff. Well, it's probably because I have like 130 hours in this game, and I've pretty much the entire time I've been talking. Anyway. Yeah, so these two characters kind of talk with each other and interact regarding their mutual interest in this story or game that they read a while ago, presumably in like middle school or high school or something. And I think that captures a very unique sentiment that is not often very clearly described or expressed. That being like, it's not always, it's a little bit of a rare thing sometimes to encounter somebody else that shares like a very specific interest or passion in like what seems to be a sort of semi-niche or obscure like game or story from the internet. But at the same time, I don't think it's like that outlandish, especially... I don't think it's like that outlandish, but it is a little bit... I think it's sort of like a yearning sentiment that a lot of people on the internet want, but doesn't always happen. And when it does happen, then it's like highlighted to a very... It's usually highlighted by algorithms and by likes and stuff. Like, oh, I met this person in my university course next to me, and you wouldn't believe it. They had this desktop wallpaper on their laptop of my favorite game that I or a game that I really appreciated for a long time, something like that. And yeah, that's really cool how that happens. And I think the author, the team of writers, or whoever made this game, captured that sentiment very clinically, very surgically, to me at least. I think it's tempting to say that there's a lot of sentiment in this story, and there is, but I think what makes this cachet very compelling to me so far is that it feels kind of simultaneously sentimental, I guess, as well as being very clinical and precise about certain things, about I would say about like coming of age stories, and about what makes those stories compelling again, and how they manage to capture the imagination and attention of so many young readers in specific parts of the world. And yeah, I think there's something to that. And I mentioned this before, but the game to me feels feels like it has overlap with category theory, and I only mention that because I've been getting like category theory videos on my algorithm for whatever reason, even though I'm not really like that interested in that. Right, I don't really have that much experience in that kind of like side of things, but yeah, it's really cool. I guess I guess there is a I'm trying to analogize like sort of metafiction narratives, I guess, to something like category theory, if that makes sense. I think it does. But anyway, hold on. Just gonna quickly get through this part. I think that's a little bit excessive. Anyway. Do I have any more food? Yes. Okay, I should be okay on stamina, because I have consumptive reflex. Okay, I need to focus a little bit on this part. Because the sea levels are rising currently. Yep. I actually really like this fourth part of Cachet a lot. Twin story, I believe. And yeah, again, it does feel like it's very upfront. This is the point where it feels like it's at least a little bit more evident or upfront about like like it's kind of like the mission statement, sort of the project, at least a little bit more distinctly, in my opinion. And yeah, I think they did a really good good way of depicting it or expressing it. Hold on. So yeah, okay, I think there was more that I wanted to talk about regarding this section or the section prior, but I just kind of forgot, or I'm just kind of like, I'm just trying not to die right now. Let's see. Hold on. Taking a step back. Oh, okay. I also like this fourth part of the visual novel because, at least for me, it feels like it like guides readers in a very smooth way of wanting to explore every aspect about the visual novel as possible. And so, yeah, after I was reading this fourth part, I was naturally like, okay, where do you go next? Because I guess to put it into perspective, the way the visual novel is laid out sort of reminds me a lot of like a point-and-click adventure game, where you're like looking for clues on how to proceed to the next area. But the areas in this are just kind of like continuously nested visual novels. So like more visual novels within visual novels, or like more reading sections within reading sections. Because it's not always a visual novel. Again, there's like one part where it's more so like a blog, like a person's blog, and there's one part that's more so like someone's AO3 entry, and all of this is accomplished through like coding wizardry that I'm not really sure how it works, but I think it like opens a localhost port or server on a browser, and then it allows you to like connect to very specific domains or something, maybe. And in that way it feels very intimate too. But hold on. Okay, I need to speed things up a little bit. Okay, I think we're okay. And yeah, so yeah, really interesting stuff so far. So I was after the fourth part, I was like, okay, where am I going next? I was like clicking around everything. I was like, I'm not sure. Until I finally found. Okay, what? How did I get to the next part? I'm trying to remember. What happened? Hold on, I'm trying to think. Oh, okay, I remember. So it was in the localhost web, the localhost server, browser, whatever you want to call it, and I changed the address because it uses like the slash system, directory system or whatever. So I just went back like one or two directories, and went back to like the home page sort of. And then from there you can sort of go to like a secret area and then another area that takes you to another download link. And yeah, this is the part where it's, I would say, has a lot of emotional catharsis. And the part that I've probably been ruminating on the most so far. Um, at least I think I've been ruminating on it in the back of my mind for like the past couple hours since I read it in the afternoon earlier. It feels like I've read it like, or read this story like a while ago, but it's only been an afternoon ago. Um, and hold on. Oh, okay. And yeah, this is. I'm wondering if I should talk about this part as much because it is a pretty spoiler heavy section, I guess some could say. However, again, I'm reminded of the idea and the framing of the story being that, to me, it's there is a level of distance that is, or detachment slash distance that is encouraged, I feel, where I can sort of look at these things, these entries, in a more detached way, and not overly worry about whether or not I'm like spoiling things or something. I guess like I'm including spoilers or whatever, or like not encouraging other readers to go through it themselves, if that makes sense. Hold on, I might be in trouble here. Because yeah, this is the part. I guess this would be like part 5 if I were continuing with this kind of linear way of interpreting the visual novel. And yeah, it has a very emotionally cathartic moment involving what presumably the author's childhood. Presumably the author's childhood, and a pretty significant experience in their childhood, and so yeah, it reads like a sort of blog entry kind of thing, where it's very compelling to me because at least the way, again, that everything's been told, there is a sense of detachment from it, and it almost makes me wonder if this is fiction, if this is just somebody's very convincing, you know, very convincing way of telling a story and a particular scene in a story regarding, you know, a young character and some maybe like potential trauma or whatever experience that they've faced from a very young age and are still trying to process. What makes me feel like it's not entirely that, or more than that, I guess, is that one, they've used a sort of recurring motif of the basement before in their prior works, and it had a very emotionally cathartic kind of resonance to it as well, I guess. And secondly, and two, I feel like this project and the entirety of the project and all of its considerations is sort of like was sort of like a necessity in a way for like a almost like a confessional style post. So what I mean by that is like I think naturally there's a lot of things people are maybe either like shameful for trying to convey or unable to convey or have trouble expressing. Can I make that? Yeah. Yeah, there's naturally a lot of things that people have difficulty in expressing. Wow, okay, that was very close. And so to me, this entire visual novel feels like a very it feels like I guess a sort of like Matryoshka doll, if I were oversimplifying it, where somebody's very emotionally charged experience from childhood could only be expressed in nested dolls, in layers, I guess, where putting it out there up front and center at the very start could just be like a very difficult process. It's like encountering a stranger and then them sort of like unleashing all of their like life traumas to you from the very get-go. They'd be like, hi, hello, oh, by the way, when I was like 3 years old, all of this horrible stuff happened to me. And yeah, naturally, I mean, some people might find that okay, I guess, but more often than not, most people would probably be like, not sure how to respond to that. So I think naturally, this sort of visual novel, and the way that it sort of includes kind of like stories nested within other stories, feels like again, someone trying to be a little bit deliberate and careful in how they want to present a pretty tender kind of experience, whether fictional or non-fictional. And yeah. But all of this effort, I guess, is I guess to me feels like it's leaning on the side of non-fictional, because I guess as evident by all this effort is what I'm trying to say in the end. My roundabout way of saying that. And yeah, it's really interesting because I think there is something to that. It feels both sort of innovative and also like a classical approach to things as well, where if this were like a movie, for example, then somewhere around like the 3/4 mark of the movie is where some writer may want to include like a very emotionally captivating scene or emotionally charged scene that has a lot of catharsis. But the payoff, I guess, wouldn't have been quite as there if it was presented up front at the very start, even though there are, definitely certainly movies that, or films or movies that do that, and but it is more so. It's a little more classically effective this way, I guess, to say, to hold on. I'm like stuck here. I'm like both stuck in this section and also with my train of thought. Okay. What is that? Okay, that might be like a little secret or something. I need to hurry up. Okay, I still have the perk where where my food should be, or my stamina should be okay. Hold on, trying to recover my train of thought. Okay, I don't think that was necessary. There. Yeah, so to me it reads like somebody's kind of confessional letter or post that necessitated a lot of layering in order for it to kind of like manifest itself, I guess. And it also relies on the reader's interest, I guess, or maybe it exploits it. Some could say, and again, that's why I feel that this is a very, very engaging visual novel, because I'm constantly, in a way, I'm constantly feeling like, should I put so much like emotional weight or investment into this story? Or should I view it from a more clinical lens and kind of analyze it in a more sterile way and see like what about it makes it effective and kind of continuously engaging and really creative to me. Hold on. How do I get past this section? Where do I go from here? I forgot how to do this section. Okay. Yeah. Maybe here? And then there. Oh, okay. Here. No, for some reason. I don't know why I'm taking that note. And yeah, I think what's interesting about this fifth part, like the confessional letter part, sort of, or post part, is that it did kind of remind me of a personal experience that shared some similarities with it. Oh, there we go. Maybe I wasn't really ready to talk about that. So I think I'll just leave off from there. And yeah, I'm really excited to continue with the rest of the story. And I'm pretty sure there's maybe like a few more parts left. But thanks for sticking around.